Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on this motion moved by the member for Kennedy. Deputy Speaker, the member for Kennedy may have killed his own argument more spectacularly than I'm able to do, but nonetheless I will set out Labor's position on this disallowance. And it is fair to say that we are motivated by different principles than those that motivate the member for Kennedy. We do believe that the state should have a monopoly of violence. We do believe that it is a wrong-footed, wrong-headed notion that a community is safer if its citizenry is armed. We do believe that if every citizen carries a weapon, that leads to a more violent society, not a less violent society. The proof of this, of course, can be found readily in statistics. If one looks at gun murders per 100,000 residents, you can see in the United States the figure is 3.7, but unsurprisingly, the largest number in the world, at 3.7. But then if we look at a country like Italy, we see that the number...
Kennedy, he was heard in silence and should afford the same hospitality to...
If we look at a country like Italy, we see the number is 0.68. If we look at Canada, we see the number is 0.50. That is less than a seventh of the neighbouring nation of the United States. In Australia, 0.13, in the United Kingdom, 0.07. So the statistics clearly bear out that where a society is liberally armed, it is a society where gun murders are at a far higher incidence. Now, having set out that principle, Deputy Speaker...
What is your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, you must give fair and accurate judgment of the figures. The figures do not define which states have the bans and which don't.
And if you do, not a point of order. It's not a point of order. It's not a point of order. I call the member for Batten.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Having set out those important principles that motivate Labor in this debate, we do entirely recognise that that leaves scope for the legitimate presence of firearms in our community. But that legitimate presence is confined to issues such as sporting, recreation, and of course the need for some people and some occupations to have guns as a part of their working life, farmers being a typical example, there being others. So it is from that prism, from that public policy proposition that Labor approaches this conversation. The Customs Prohibited Imports Regulations 1956, the principal regulations, impose import controls for various items, including firearms and firearms-related articles. The amending regulation amends the principal regulations as they relate to the importation of lever-action shotguns with a magazine capacity of more than 5 rounds. Issues relating to the prevention, detection and prosecution of crime are, as you know, Deputy Speaker, for the most part the responsibility of state and territory governments. The various categories of firearms were agreed by all Australian jurisdictions at a special meeting of the Australasian Police Ministers' Council in May of 1996, some time ago, and that gave rise to the 1996 National Firearms Agreement. The categories are reflected in both the Commonwealth legislation that regulates firearm imports and state and territory legislation that regulates licensing, such as the Firearms Act 1996 in my own state of Victoria. To import a firearm, a person must have a firearm licence, obtained through the relevant state territory registry, and permission to import the firearm obtained from the Commonwealth Attorney-General's Department in some cases, and the state and territory registry in others. Any changes to the categories would need to be approved by all jurisdictions through the Law, Crime and Community Safety Council. The technical elements of the National Firearms Agreement are currently being reviewed with a view to being updated as recommended by the Martin Place Siege Review. As part of this, the appropriate classification of lever-action shotguns, particularly those with a magazine capacity of more than 5 rounds, is being considered. In order to ensure any update of the NFA in this regard is not undermined by having a large number of lever-action shotguns with a magazine capacity of more than 5 rounds imported into Australia in the time taken to finalise the review, a temporary prohibition on the importation of those firearms is being put in place. and I'd humbly submit, Deputy Speaker, that is mere common sense. This is an interim measure until the review and the update of the NFA are completed. This process will ensure that there will be fewer individuals licensed to possess these firearms who will be affected should the update to the NFA result in a change in the categorisations of such firearms. Again, Deputy Speaker, mere common sense. The update of the NFA is expected to be finalised in early 2016. The purpose of the amending regulation is therefore to amend the principal regulations to prohibit the importation of lever-action shotguns fitted with a firearm magazine of a capacity of more than 5 rounds. In order to ensure that the prohibition on the importation of lever-action shotguns with a magazine capacity of greater than 5 cannot be avoided by importing the magazines separately, the amending regulation also prohibits the importation of magazines with a capacity of greater than 5 rounds for lever-action shotguns. Labor believes that as gun technology is updated, it is entirely appropriate that our laws are reviewed from time to time to ensure that they keep up with the advances in technology and that they don't become outdated. We will carefully consider the outcomes of the National Firearms Review when they are released. Further to the measures in this regulation, which will prevent the importation of the Adler 110 lever-action shotgun with a magazine capacity of 7 rounds, Labor believes that the government must also act to prevent other powerful weapons entering the Australian market while this review is being completed. We are extremely concerned by reports that a modified version of the Adler shotgun may now be imported into Australia. Under the current National Firearms Agreement, lever-action shotguns with a magazine capacity of 5 rounds or less are a Category A, and that means they are available to Australia's 700,000 licensed recreational shooters. Deputy Speaker, I might say recreational shooters, not a militia ready to spring to the defence of our democracy at the behest of the member for Kennedy. Gun critics have said that the Adler 110, which can shoot multiple rounds in rapid succession, is faster and more powerful than other models of firearms. Given that the appropriate classification of lever-action shotguns is currently under review, we shouldn't be seeing more of these weapons enter Australia. The Victorian Police Minister Wade Noonan said that they would argue the weapon should have the same restriction as a semi-automatic firearm. He said, and I quote, "I have spoken to the Acting Chief Commissioner Tim Cartwright about this matter. He has raised his concerns that this weapon and others like it are no longer appropriate for a Category A classification, and I share his concerns." End quote. Deputy Speaker, can I stress that this is an interim measure until the review and the update of the NFA is complete. Labor appreciates that the overwhelming majority of firearm owners comply with the relevant legislation, and we acknowledge the work of the various firearms organisations who promote the safe use and the safe storage of firearms. Labor also recognises that there is a very significant number indeed of Australians who participate in the sport of shooting. However, until the National Firearms Agreement review is complete, this shotgun should not be allowed into the Australian market, modified or otherwise. And given the events of the past week, domestically and abroad, now is not the time to erode or undermine John Howard's tough gun laws, which are respected around the world. Under Tony Abbott, the Liberal government was happy to put political expediency ahead of community safety concerns, but Malcolm Turnbull can now put safety before politics. He should show leadership where Tony Abbott didn't, and immediately have this modified version of the shotgun banned until the National Firearms Agreement review is complete. The Liberal government must immediately act to prevent these high-powered weapons from being imported into Australia in the absence of such a thorough review. Deputy Speaker, on that basis, Labor will be opposing the discontinuance.
I thank the member.